First, we'll start with a brief recap. Then we'll get into some deeper analysis and do a close line-by-line reading of the chapter. And finally, we'll finish with the vocabulary, including some context and definitions. Brief recap of chapter 28 in The Handmaid's Tale. There's an absolute ton going on in this chapter. We get a lot of action. So it starts with our narrator, Offred, looking out the window from her bedroom in the commander's house, and she's reflecting on the time past. And we get filled in on a huge amount of backstory to what's happened in the shift from America to Gilead. So it starts with a conversation between her and Moira, her old friend, having coffee in a normal time and talking about work and their jobs. And we find out that Offred worked in a library, and her job was shifting data or information from old antiquarian books onto compact discs. We find out that, first off, her relationship with Luke had actually started as an affair, so he was married to another woman before her, which offers a certain kind of moral perspective or judgment, a more layered or nuanced understanding of Offred's character. And then we also find out that Congress was attacked, and after Congress was attacked and quickly fell, obviously it was to a terrorist group, and it appears to be a domestic terrorist group who have a theocratic or religious organization. The first thing that happened was the men who are now in power started to take away privileges and rights of women. All of the women started protesting or having marches, but we find out that Offred didn't actually participate in the marches, so she stayed at home. And both her mother and Moira sort of chided her or criticized her for being a prude or for staying back and not wanting to take action. We also find out that things like pornography stores or porno marts were closed down. At the end, there's a new sort of deal or device being used by Offred to meet the commander. Nick is in on the act, and if he has a twisted cap, that's her signal that she's to go see the commander. So let's get right into some deeper analysis and a close line-by-line reading of the chapter. It starts with Offred looking out the window, and she feels ghost-like or like an apparition, as if she's not really there in her body in Gilead. And this is sort of foreshadowing the whole chapter, which is going to be a reminiscent backstory and sort of explaining to the reader how we got from America, the democracy, to Gilead, the theocracy. I sit on the window seat, looking out through the semi-sheer of curtains. White nightgown, the window is as open as it goes. There's a breeze, hot in the sunlight, and the white cloth blows across my face. From the outside, I must look like a cocoon, a spook, face enshrouded like this, only the outlines visible, of nose, bandaged mouth, blind eyes. But I like the sensation, the soft cloth brushing my skin. It's like being in a cloud. So again, this reference to that word nuanced and the cloud-like or misty veil that she's seeing everything through in Gilead. We also find out, interestingly, that Moira disapproved of Luke and Offred's relationship because Luke was married when Offred had met him. So there's an interesting judgmental or kind of more complex understanding of her friend and also her. What would she tell me about the commander if she were here? Probably she'd disprove. She disproved of Luke back then. Not of Luke, but of the fact she said I was poaching on another woman's ground. I said Luke wasn't a fish or a piece of dirt either. He was a human being and could make his own decisions. She said I was rationalizing. I said I was in love. She said that was no excuse. Moira was always more logical than. So again, seeing how Moira is the balance to Offred's ballast, right? She writes her ship. And it's interesting too that Moira has a very set, clear idea of values, right? She's a strong feminist who puts the principles of women first. So if Offred was doing something to another woman by being with that woman's husband, Moira was against that thing. So clear, distinct values, contrasted black and white, as opposed to Offred's nuanced understanding of the world, which is many shades of gray, much more complex. Offred tells us further, I said there was more than one way of living with your head in the sand, and that if Moira thought she could create utopia by shutting herself up in a women-only enclave, she was sadly mistaken. Men were not just going to go away, I said. You couldn't just ignore them. So we're starting to really understand Offred's background and her thinking about the world. It's strange now to think about having a job. Job. It's a funny word. It's a job for a man. Do a jobby, they'd say to children. We're getting a sense that Offred's really always been a contrarian, right? Going against her best friend, going against her mother, not wanting to be swept up in any sort of group movement or group think, such as feminism, and now again in the theocratic Gilead. So she's a bit of an outsider, a loner. All those women having jobs, hard to imagine now, but thousands of them had jobs, millions. It was considered the normal thing. Now it's like remembering the paper money when they still had that. We're getting this comparison of the old money or the old system of exchange, because money is a system where you exchange value, right? There's no actual use for the paper. It's only an IOU note passing between two people to exchange, say, the hours and the value of hours of their labor for the value of a cup of coffee. And then we get a little hint at the actual big action that shifted the discourse and politics of America. It was after the catastrophe, when they shot the president and machine gunned the Congress, and the army declared a state of emergency. They blamed it on the Islamic fanatics at the time. Keep calm, they said on television. Everything is under control. I was stunned. Everyone was. I know that. It was hard to believe. The entire government gone like that. How did they get in? How did it happen? So certainly in 2021 and after the last election cycle and what's happened in the United States, this sort of prescient feeling of Margaret Atwood being like an oracle, or this book somewhat predicting the current political situation in America, seems apt. But we have to remember, as readers, going between the lines and getting a little deeper, what this really tells us is that the current situation is similar to the situation that Atwood saw in the 1980s. It's not that she's predicted the future, it's that her notion of the palimpsest of history, which it in fact comes from Baudelaire, an 18th century French writer, that's what's true. The idea that history is etched and wiped out and etched again and again and again, and that the events from the past reoccur in the present, and that gives things an air of prescience or of sort of seer in the future. That's the important takeaway here. Offred tells us when she was actually ushered out of the library where she worked, quote, I could see out into the corridor, and there were two men standing there, in uniforms, with machine guns. This was too theatrical to be true. Yet there they were, sudden apparitions, like Martians. There was a dreamlike quality to them. They were too vivid, too at odds with their surroundings. So now there's this part where the beginning of the chapter reoccurs, right? At the beginning of the chapter, our narrator was dreamlike, was an apparition, felt alien or Martian to Gilead, but with the whole world turned upside down and everything reversed. It's gone the other way, where she's looking back, and in America, the rulers of Gilead seemed like apparitions, like Martians. Then I remembered something I'd seen and hadn't noticed at the time. It wasn't the army. It was some other army, right? This idea here of misunderstanding and miscommunication, and how when you try and pin something on a group or on a people, or to label or make it simpler than it is, it creates a misunderstanding of the complex and broader reality, right? Real life is full of uncertainties, constantly. Infinite factors are at play. So just seeing a man in a uniform with a gun, you're going to think, oh, it's the army. And that's what they all thought, when in fact it wasn't the army, right? It was some sort of terrorist group rising up. A few things were blown up. Post offices, subway stations, but you couldn't even be sure who was doing it. It could have been the army, to justify the computer searches and the other ones. I didn't go on any of the marches. Luke said it would be futile, and I had to think about them, my family, him and her. Really distraught and sad picture, right? Where the rational optimist in Offred and in all the other Americans forces them to tell themselves that everything is going to be okay. And I think here there's a definite shade or reoccurrence of what happened in Western Europe when the Nazis were taking over and invading countries, that people just didn't expect that reality could be true. At the very end of this chapter, there's a little moment where, after finding out about the Nick and the commander and their new deal with the tipped hat cap, there's a second recollection of Luke and Offred together. This moment where I think really signifies the power shift in the book and in the old world to the new world. It's a pivotal chapter. Quote, "We still have each other," I said. It was true. Then why did I sound, even to myself, so indifferent? So again, Offred's feeling some guilt here, having a reaction to her past self and why that self didn't stand up or didn't rebel. He kissed me then, as if now I'd said that things could get back to normal. But something had shifted, some balance. I felt shrunken, so that when he put his arms around me, gathering me up, I was small as a doll. I felt love going forward without me. So Offred is feeling her choices, her power, her freedom to choose slipping away, right? She feels like a doll, a plaything, no longer an actor on the stage of life. Quote, "He doesn't mind this," I thought. "He doesn't mind it at all. Maybe he even likes it. We are not each other's anymore. Instead, I am his. Unworthy, unjust, untrue, but that is what happened." Now for a quick vocabulary. Constitution, a body of fundamental principles or established precedents according to which a state or other organization is acknowledged to be governed. The action of forming or establishing something, a person's physical state as regards vitality, health, and strength. So we're told Congress was eliminated by a machine gun attack, and the Constitution of America was rewritten for Gilead. But also I think there's this idea that we're learning a lot in this chapter about Offred, the person, and her constitution, what makes up her vitality, her health, her strength. Her ability to not act, to see the world as more complex and nuanced, may have hindered her or stopped her from protesting and rebelling. Apparition. So an apparition is a ghost or ghost-like image of a person, a remarkable or unexpected appearance of someone or something. It's this idea of like Christ or the Virgin appearing before your eyes. This idea of Offred feeling like an apparition, or the terrorists arriving at her work who appear out of thin air. Underground, beneath the surface of the earth, but it can also be something done in secrecy or in hiding, especially as a result of carrying out subversive political activities. Definitely this idea of the underground that Offred has learned about in the preceding chapters, and then also the underground that must have been happening in America for this theocratic group of terrorists to rise up and change the laws and throw the government. This word prodigal is used here, prodigal. Usually we think of that word in terms of Jesus and the prodigal son, but it can also mean spending money or using resources freely and recklessly, wastefully extravagant, having or giving something on a lavish scale. Think back to that other word, decadent. And it can be a person who spends money this way, like a high roller or a baller, someone who's just throwing away their cash. Making a prodigal son or daughter is a person who leaves home to lead a prodigal life, but later makes a repentant return. Thanks so much for reading. That was chapter 28 of The Handmaid's Tale. I'm Mr. Jordan. If you have any questions, comments, please leave them below and I'll get back to them as soon as I can. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in chapter 29.